Hey, greetings, my friends. Welcome to the Grit and Equity Talks podcast with yours truly, Dr. India White. I'm super thrilled to be here with you guys. I hope that you've had a wonderful week. I hope you're getting a lot of stuff done. Some of us are on spring break, so I hope that you are doing your best to recoup and rejuvenate and to love on those around you. Before we get started, I do want to make some announcements. So, first things first, the Grit and Equity Talks podcast with Dr. India White will be featured on X Factor EDU, hosted by Dr. Matthew Joseph and the Tribe, and it can be found on Spotify. Okay, so I'm super excited about that. I also wanted to remind you guys to follow me on social media whenever you get a chance. My Facebook is Miss India White, LinkedIn is The India White, Twitter is Indy Speak and Teach, Instagram is Indy238. YouTube is India White 123, and TikTok is Dr. India White. Now, if you're watching the show or this podcast you're listening, usually we're going to talk about closing the achievement gap. So if you are trying to close the achievement gap, but you're having classroom management issues, or if your students just aren't motivated to do the work, then this is the perfect podcast. The Grit and Equity podcast is the perfect podcast for you. So thank you so much for joining me. I also wanted to remind you guys of some upcoming events. I do have the Minnesota Council of Teachers of Mathematics event where I'll be a featured speaker coming in April, so in a couple of weeks, right after the solar eclipse. So, hopefully everything will still be intact so that we can enjoy a wonderful time together in Minnesota. Also, I'll be heading to Wisconsin for the Wisconsin Math Council as one of the keynote speakers there. Super excited. Can't wait to see the tribe and to mingle with all you rock stars in Wisconsin. Please share the word. I will be there for you guys. I'm super excited. Can't wait to see you guys and talk about grit and talk about equitable practices and to just be real and just talk about life. All right. Now, I also wanted to make an announcement. I'm super excited about it. The Grit mini workshop has launched on the Grassroots workshop. So if you look for a Grit mini workshop on the grassrootsworkshops.com website, you should be able to see it. It is there for you. Check it out. Share it with your teachers, share it with principals, share it with district leaders, and see if maybe it's something that your district leaders or you're in a couple of teachers or whatnot could get together and talk about how to harness grit to help students thrive, because that is a bunch of TLC from me to you about grit. It's the research behind it, and it's also some practical ways that you can really harness grit and help students to harness grit so that they can thrive in the math classroom. So I hope that you guys are able to take advantage of those opportunities that I have listed for you. Now I want to get right into our show. So today we're going to be talking about grit and how grit impacts decision making. I wanted to come on here and talk about this because right now we are, we've lived at least half of the school year, and students are finishing up the third semester going into the fourth, or the third quarter going into the fourth quarter. And they're starting to make some decisions. Some students are making decisions on what colleges they want to go to. Other students are making decisions on what classes they want to take next year, what sports they want to, participate in. And so they're going to need to know how to be gritty and how to make some decisions. I know that sometimes the students are struggling with, anxiety just in general. They might have a tough time making decisions, or if they're dealing with trauma, they might have a tough time making decisions because maybe they lack confidence, or maybe, they're just insecure, or maybe they just have been in an environment where their voice has not been empowered. And so they're going to need you as the educator, as the administrator on board to help kind of cultivate that sense of confidence so that they can start making some decisions. So I did some digging. Yes, I was a nerd for you. And so I'm going to talk with you about some of the research that I was able to find about helping with decision making. And then I'll tell you also some of my just tidbits and what I think would help students with decision making. So let me go ahead and transition us to one of these really neat articles that I was able to find for us. So first things first, this article, I'm going to go back up, and it is called Grit as a Predictor and Outcome of Educational, Professional, and Personal Success, a Systemic Review. So this this is really neat because it's talking about just success, just overall. And so this is by Francisco Fernandez Martin and Jose Terraro and Miriam Hervas Torres. I'm so sorry if I butcher their names, but I thought that this is a really neat article and it's rich with content. And so I wanted to kind of highlight what they were talking about. So here they're talking about grit, and let me see if I can find the version of the article in okay, there we go. They put it back in English. For a minute it went back and forth between English and Spanish. So they start out and they say people show different patterns of behavior depending on whether they succeed or fail pursuing their long-term goals. Okay, so again, when you're talking about grit, it's all about the end game. It's all about the long-term goal. And so it says, whereas some people are steadfast in their pursuit of such goals, sometimes over the years or decades, other people abandon pursuit in the face of significant challenges to the attainment of such goals. So research findings have spurred the evidence of the so-called non-cognitive abilities as predictors of individual performance and productivity in different domains. Of course, we've got Dr. Duckworth, we've got Yeager. So Duckworth and Yeager, their article in 2015 and the Garcia's article in 2014. So they're talking about that there. So they're going to continue to talk about grit and how it's helping with decision making and making outcomes. So I was able to go through and do some digging in this article, and I found some parts of it that I just wanted to kind of talk about with you and talk about what their research found. So first things first here, they're saying that within the big 5 taxonomy personality traits, grit shares content. Okay. And it talks about with the, okay, here we go. Grit shares content with the conscientiousness domain as reflected in its conceptual relatedness to several of the consciousness facets. So those are orderliness, dependability, self-control, and industriousness. So, and indeed, grit is also viewed by some personality theorists as falling with the broad family of consciousness constructs. Yet, despite its conceptual similarity to facets of this, none of these consciousness facets fully captures the combination of passion and perseverance that characterizes grit. So they're saying, yeah, you've got the Bloom taxonomy, which if you don't know what that is, it's like the triangle, and it talks about all of the different levels of belonging and which I think is very imperative of trying to build a whole child and teach to the whole child, and making sure that their needs are met while you're teaching them. So it's talking about this, and it's saying that we've got to do a little bit more digging. So it's saying that grit, when they're going into grit, it's saying that there's a conceptual overlap between this broad domain and the relative narrow grit trait. Okay, and it talks about how grit actually includes a specific and unique focus on long-term, higher order goals. So again, after their findings, they're saying here, higher order goals, grit, you need grit for long-term, higher order goals. Talks about the grit scale, Dr. Duckworth's grit scale. And so, which has been highly vetted and found to help so many people with trying to understand this. So let's keep going, because I just wanted to keep digging about some other things that I found here. So they're going to continue talking to us about grit. And so here, so they're saying we need a little bit more. When you're talking about Bloom's taxonomy and grit, we want to take it a step further. And so now they're saying here, indeed, Duckworth et al., they noted that grit accounted for an average of 4% of the variance in success outcomes, which corresponds to the correlation of R equals 0.20 or a small to medium effect. Other authors like Sheldon et al., they compared grit to 9 other positive personality characteristics in a year-long study of goal attainment. There you go. And they found that grit was most reliable predictor of achieving personally meaningful goals over that period. Again, they found that grit was the most reliable predictor of achieving meaningful goals over that period. So very interesting. And then, of course, let's see what else here. Let's keep digging. So if you keep going, now we're talking about more evidence about grit being a predictor of success and really how it's helping with decision making. So basically, if you're able to cultivate grit and harness grit in students and in leaders and teachers, and you're able to help them to tie it to a long-term goal and to the higher order thinking and those goals, then you're able to really help them make decisions. So look here. Evidences of grit as a predictor. So it says here, in the case of grit being a predictor, in their review, they found a total of 57 studies. Okay, so we might want to listen to what they're talking about here. So it says, in relation to educational success, of 25 studies that were reviewed, grit predicts educational attainment among general population. And it also predicts educational attainment among the university, middle school, and high school students. So this is across the scale. So they're saying that it's tied to the educational attainment, being able to finish, being able to attain that degree, attain graduation, attain success in school. And then it says here, additionally, grit predicts GPA among middle school students, high school students, undergraduate students, and non-traditional doctoral students. Very powerful. So you're saying here that grit is in the mix of the success of all students, no matter what level. Very powerful finding. And then it says, furthermore, grit predicts retention. That is the word that we need to start focusing on. Retention. Because why are students dropping out of school? Well, if we can find out how to retain those students, then we can help to close the achievement gap. We can help speak to how we can help students persist through school and to be retained, or to have retention in our schools, so that there's not this big turnover of our students. So it says here, furthermore, grit predicts retention among freshmen and candidates at the United States Military Academy, the National Guard Youth Challenge Program cadets at the Washington Youth Academy, and the 24-day Army Special Operations Forces selection course, and potential dropping out among foreign university students powerful, and career changes in general population. Look at that. So you're telling me all those groups, they were able to find that grit helped with retention of the students and those that are enrolled in these various programs. So grit is essential, and it's a game changer when you're trying to help students with decision making. So let's keep digging. So it says here, in relation to grit as a predictor of professional success, of a total of 11 studies were identified. They said that grit also predicted objective career success, like the career status and salary. Also, grit helps with retention in the workplace. Look at this. Also, with teacher effectiveness. Isn't that something? Teaching effectiveness. And then also with job satisfaction. It says not subjective career success. So that's very interesting. But it did find that grit was tied to teaching effectiveness. So teachers out there, I tell you, it does work. And it makes me think of Derek, who I met in LA, and he talked about how the grit workbook and the grit framework that I was able to present over there was really helping his teachers with grit as well. So anyway, let's keep going. So it says here, additionally, grit predicts well-being, burnout, or stress in the workplace, optimism of principals. Wow, look at that. And work engagement among police detectives. So again, grit predicts the well-being. It also predicts burnout or stress in the workplace, optimism of principals, and work engagement among police officers. So I think this is very interesting because it's showing us here that if you're able to harness grit in leaders or in students, then you're on the right track. So then the thing is, how do we help to tie decision making to grit? So I'll share a little bit of my tips with that for you. So I said that if you're trying to really help students and even teachers with decision making, but I'm going to focus on students for the sake of teachers here. So if you're trying to help your students with gritty decision making, the first thing that I think you need to really do is get down to the root of any blockage or any anxiety. So why are the students having a hesitancy of finishing in a class? Maybe so maybe some students feel like they can't even come to the table and compete. Like maybe they feel like they just can't even do it. So I remember tutoring a student. He was I want to say he was about second grade or third grade. And he was very nervous, very nervous. And I remembered asking the young man to pull out his textbook and to pull out any homework. He didn't have much content, regarding teacher notes, which I think, by the way, educators, if you're not providing teacher notes, I would highly recommend you look into seeing how you can provide teacher notes that students can take home with them over the weekend so that they can study, or that it can assist them throughout their, time of submitting homework and understanding the assignment, and not just even over the weekends. I really think that, the more the better. Anyway, and I don't think I just have my personal opinions about that. I think that, we should equip students as much as possible. And that means it does take more sacrifice. Yeah, you do it for students that, are documented to have accommodations, but what about your regular tier 1 students that could still benefit from having teacher notes and various examples displayed and modeled by their teacher? It's very powerful. Anyways, I digress. So the student, I was teaching this child, and before he could even answer my questions to him, he was paralyzed, like emotionally. He just could not. And I recognized he had some type of trauma or anxiety. So I started asking him questions like, what is it? What's going on? What, how are you feeling right now? And he just literally was just like starting to kind of like, oh, I don't know. And then he's just like, I don't know. I'm not good at math. I just can't do this. Now listen, guys, this is problem 1. And this child already had given up. So my thing is, how many other students are stuck at problem 1? It's not even the math. It's another issue beyond the math. There's something going on. Maybe they're afraid of numbers. Maybe they're dyslexic. Maybe they had a traumatic experience when trying to review homework with parents and guardians. And maybe they just get nervous. Maybe that's not their vibe, So we've got to get to the root of any blockage or anxiety and walk that child through that. And that means, of course, having some type of healthy relationship with the child and listening to them, allowing them to hear themselves. Another thing is, especially if you're tutoring a child or you have them in a safe environment, allowing them to hear themselves read, allowing them to hear themselves talk, because you would be amazed how many students have been muted and silenced. Whether it's like they're following things like, hey, I'm the adult, you don't say nothing, or, and maybe they're just used to that. So maybe they're used to just holding on to their thoughts and everything, and they've just coasted through. So maybe they're going to need you to help with cultivating their student voice so that they can get through any anxieties that would block them from being able to be gritty and to be decision makers in your classroom. Now, the next thing I would recommend is to find a way to motivate them. So find out, what are they interested in? Find out, what are they aspiring to get out of completing the class? Or maybe you could turn it into something fun. Like, maybe there's a Kahoot game. I do have some Kahoot gritty things out there for you guys as well that you could find and you can use in your classrooms. So what can you do to motivate those students to turn it into something fun, something spicy, something that makes them want to try again? I've never seen a student turn down a video game. I've never seen a student turn down a Kahoot game or a Blicket or whatever. I've never seen it. So find out a way to stimulate them. Maybe a class project. I know one thing that worked very well, especially when you're starting a unit, instead of just throwing all the math at them, because sometimes it's very intimidating and they feel like math is like almost like another world and they're entering into another world just for that hour, right? So one thing I would do is and many of my teammates would do, we would have like construction paper and allow students to decorate it. Maybe they could break it up in all fours and they could define words from the chapter. So they could, maybe one corner was like 10 vocab words. And then they could do another corner, could be a couple of problems, like examples as to how, like, how to make those words relevant in a math setting, right? And then the other squares could be either other examples or it could be visuals as to how they can remember the concepts themselves. So it was like a graphic organizer that we would allow students to do on the colorful construction paper. We would allow them to use markers, like, colored pencils. They could decorate it, they could fold it, they can cut it, they can do whatever. I mean, it was a really good time, but it was really good to start a unit like that as well, because then students, it just took away from the anxiety. So sometimes you can open up a lesson and say, okay, guys, I want to talk to you today about whatever, fractions, irrational numbers, whatever you're talking about, and then throw at them an activity like this. And then you can, maybe put some time to it. Like, okay, let's see for the first square, the first 5 minutes, we're going to spend on the first square, and it could be a competition either against each other, or it could be something where you can say, okay, I'm going to go around, and in 5 minutes, if you're done, you're going to get a smiley face on the top of your paper. Listen, I did this from grades K-12. Smiley faces have never been declined. I don't care how old the student. You can have a 19-year-old senior that would love a smiley face on the corner of their paper. So don't underestimate the power of a smiley face in the corner of the paper. So anyways, let's keep going. So definitely getting down to the root of why there's blockage and walking that student through it, giving that student some ideas as to how to move forward from that. And then, of course, we talked about motivating them just now, and then incentivizing their passions. Do you have a money system, a ticket system? What are you doing to help incentivize that passion? And to let them know, like, it's worth finishing, it's worth persisting through those particular assignments and tasks that you have for them. Do you have a class project? What are you doing to help them with that? And then, of course, reminding students of their goals that they've already set. Like, listen, you told me at the beginning of the year, this is where you wanted to be, or, you told me that you want to, raise your grade or raise your GPA, and you're on the right track. I see you. And I really want to encourage teachers to really continue to be a cheerleader for your students. I'm going to help them. Or, if the students have like a grit. So here's my little grit workbook. If the students have the grit workbook, right? And in this workbook, they do have a commitment that they can fill out, and they can say, I'm dedicating this to myself. I have a statement of commitment. This is what I'm committing to myself. You can remind them of that commitment. Hey, in your commitment, you stated that this is what you were going to do this year. So hold them accountable as you're also helping them with decision making. Okay, so I think that these are some things that you can do. And then, of course, celebrating those students, because students need to be celebrated. I mean, it's just they need more. They need more. There's a lot weighing them down. And I think that they can definitely use the support of their teachers and leaders on campuses to help with decision making and cultivating that grit so that they can continue to persist. All right, so those are my little tips for you when it comes down to helping students to be gritty with decision making. I hope you're able to, utilize those. And I now want to go back to another article where we're going to be talking about more of the concepts of decision making and things like that. But not just that, just talking about more research about having a gritty mindset for decision making. So I found this really cool article by Kaya et al. And it talks about math mindsets and academic grit. How are they related to primary achievement? They start out by talking about Duckworth and Dweck's research. And I want to talk about some of the things that I was able to dig through these articles. Feel free to steal these articles and look through them in your own time as well. So it says research on self-theories in education has gained momentum in recent years. One of the commonly studied self-theory has been mindsets. So they were proposed by Dweck regarding the malleability of individual qualities such as intelligence and personality. Dweck suggests that these non-cognitive variables can drastically change the way an individual handles a learning situation, the degree of effort and persistence they display, and even their level of achievement. And so then they talk also about grit, and they say grit is related to performance and retention. So here we go. Let's get started. So they found here that grit is related to performance and retention in school and even in the workplace. And that's, of course, from Duckworth and her team, and a couple of different articles in 2007 and Duckworth and Quinn in 2009. And then it says in 2016 in her book, Duckworth argued that grit is changeable and malleable, therefore has great potential to facilitate development and success. Both Dweck's and Duckworth's conceptualization of mindset and grit were domain general, meaning they apply to all fields from the school and to workplace. Again, that the conceptualization of mindset and grit being connected, they were domain general. So they apply to all fields from the school place to the workplace. You need grit for college and career readiness. You need grit for transitions from grade levels, and you need grit from transitioning students from high school into college and career. So grit is it. And so we're talking more about mindsets here. So it says, similar, now the next thing, similar to general intelligence, math mindsets are based on two assumptions about math intelligence. So they're saying that you have the first mindset is that people either have a fixed mindset in which their capability to accomplish a given math related task is innate, or they have a growth mindset in which their capability about math can be developed with practice or daily instruction. And this is Daly et al. Yes, great research there. And it talks also about previous research that found that students' growth math mindset was associated with their gains in their math outcomes at the secondary level. Very interesting. They also found that there was a general growth mindset among positive associations with math achievement. This is imperative, and this is why it's important that we continue to boost our students and make them feel like they are math, that they are mathematicians, that they can do math. And so this is just something to keep in mind here. So now let's keep going. Academic grit. So grit, it's been introduced by Duckworth in her Duckworth and Quinn as a personality trait that predicts achievement. And it talks about how it has two aspects, namely consistency of interests and perseverance of effort. So consistency of interest, it refers to not changing your goals or interests frequently. And that's where we need to help students, because students, when they're changing their goals, they're having a problem with decision making. So this is why grit is key, because it helps students to not change their goals and their interests frequently, but to make a choice and to persist. And so then that talks about the second part here, where it says to also have perseverance of effort, and how it implies that when you're having that perseverance of effort, it has the predisposition of working hard, even in the face of obstacles. That is the key. Now, I'm going to stop sharing real quick just to say something. Grit does not take away from the struggle of students. It does not take away from some things that students face, some hardships, some injustices, some obstacles, some unknown, shocking, traumatic events that students go through. It does not say, okay, just deal with it, or it's no big deal. That never happened to you. You're not going through this, whatever. It does not negate what students are really facing. What it does is it gives them a strategy for working through what they're facing, the problems that they are overcoming. It helps them to work through that strategically without falling prey or falling victim to their circumstances. It helps to really cultivate a mindset and a trait so that they can get through anything, no matter what. Now, some students, it'll take longer for them to get through than others, and that's expected. I mean, life paints itself differently for every student, but we are able to help students with the deck of cards they've been dealt to still be gritty and to be successful in their lot of life. So with that said, I want to continue with this article that we were looking at and see what else they had to say. So they're talking about academic grit. And that's the thing, is there's so many different lenses of grit, right? There's your professional, grit, there's academic grit, there's grit if you're trying to work out. There's just so many different lenses to it. And so I look at this. I think this is really neat. This graphic here. So it says that you've got two different ways to look at mindsets. You've got a growth mindset, you've got a fixed mindset. Then both of those affect academic grit. And then both of those are when you're going through the lens of academic grit, that affects math achievement. So it's going to look different. And of course, students that have a growth mindset, they're going to start out more gritty, right? But then the students with the fixed mindset, you can help through helping them to change their mindset and helping them with decision making to eventually overcome any hurdles, any blockages, right? So that they can develop their academic grit and to also have math achievement at the end here. So let's keep going. So some more research here. It says, similarly, Kanagara et al., they found that grittier college students showed higher levels of growth mindset, resilience, mental well-being, and self-control. So very powerful, because when they had higher levels of growth mindset, they were able to also have resilience, and they were able to have self-control, which is definitely going to help them with that decision-making piece. And then it says here, in a primary school sample, okay, grit was significantly related to academic self-efficacy and school satisfaction. So as you can see, grit here is across the scale is doing its thing. It's attributing to the success of so many students. And then, of course, here it says both Dweck and Duckworth, they emphasize the importance of growth mindset to develop grit. In other words, individuals with the growth mindset tend to be grittier. Furthermore, several studies have also found a moderate positive association between growth mindset and general grit. So again, there's a positive association between having growth mindset and general grit. So I'm going to stop there because I can literally keep going forever about this fabulous concept of grit and how to develop grit. And so in general, if you're trying to help students to be more gritty, it's imperative that you get down to anything that, like I said before, would be blocking them, and making sure you're finding ways to motivate them, incentivize their passions, remind them of their goals, and always celebrate them. You're their biggest cheerleader. So don't hold back on that celebration. Give a little bit more love, a little bit more grace, and cheer them on a little bit louder, because they need you. So thank you so much for joining this show today on the Grit and Equity podcast with Dr. India White. Again, you can find this on the X Factor EDU network. It'll be featured on Wednesdays at 7 o'clock Eastern Standard Time with Dr. Matthew Joseph and the Tribe. And it also can be found on Spotify. I also wanted to remind you guys again of my upcoming events in Minnesota, MCTM. I'll be there in April. And also I'm planning to be there in Wisconsin, May 2024 as a keynote. Thank you to all of you. And there are other events that I have not listed that I'll be here and there, and I'll talk about those later. But if you're looking to also get me to come out to some of your events, please don't hesitate to send me an email at india.white.123@gmail.com. I would love to work with you and to get on your schedule to help you with some events. Also, feel free to follow me when you get a chance on Facebook, Miss India White. LinkedIn is The India White. Twitter is Indie Speak and Teach. Instagram is Indie238. YouTube is India White 123, and TikTok is Dr. India White. So guys, you guys have been fabulous. I appreciate you so much for joining me again on the Grit and Equity podcast. And also don't forget to check out my new Grit mini workshop on the Grassroots Workshops website with Robert and the Tribe. So I would love to work with you guys. I can't wait to hear how gritty you've been. If you have any testimonials as well, send me an email, okay? Thanks so much again for tuning in. It's always fabulous with you guys. Okay, until next time, see ya. Stay great.